And yeah, I mean, this is a really important space for discussion. I don't think it gets enough. There's one big challenge, which is that I don't really call the shots anymore because I no longer have access to any of the material. It is uniquely held by the media organizations. So I can say, hey, here are my thoughts, but ultimately it's no longer my decision. And that's actually proper, I think, because you don't want a single individual making decisions that have gigantic public policy ramifications. And the press is uniquely situated in society to make sort of those public interest determinations. Now, there is this countervailing argument that I actually am quite convinced by, which is particularly when the period of greatest danger has passed. Um, when the National Security Agency or CIA or FBI or DIA or whoever theoretically, some future leaks documents would be the ones in controversy, have had time to adjust, have had time to change, where their people are located, if they think somebody's at personal risk. The calculus does begin to change. It should be revisited. Now, there are defenses against this that are actually quite compelling. One of the least, or one of the most persuasive is the fact that I know for a fact at least one of these media organizations has approached a public university, one that's particularly well regarded, and said, why don't you use sort of your center who's dedicated to this kind of journalism, this kind of work, to take custody of these? And you can sort of in perpetuity play the role of national, international, global library and handle access requests and everything like that, accrediting journalists. And they said, whoa, that is too hot for us. And that's because many universities are reliant upon government funding, government grants. And even outside the United States, because of the international nature of the collaboration that happened against the public here, where many of these documents don't just implicate the United States government, they implicate what's called sort of the Five Eyes network, the US, the UK, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia, in addition to wider groups of what they call third-party partners. You start to see that it's quite difficult to find an institution that's both got the credibility publicly to handle this in an appropriate way and the capability that they can protect this from the charges that national security officials will level, which is, look, these are academics. They don't know what they're doing. They can't fight against Chinese spies. They can't fight against Russian spies, and so on and so forth. So how do we resolve this tension? And this was actually something that, I'd be happy to hear other people's arguments on, because it's very much a point of public discussion. This is actually a technical issue that I think is possible to resolve in a quite compelling, sort of interesting way. But I don't talk about the particular projects that I'm working on until they're finished, because I don't like the idea of sort of promotion. I think it's a little bit slimy. However, setting that aside, if there aren't technical solutions to this, if there are only sort of institutional ones, the idea is, whose decision is that to make, and how do we do this? Now, in the first days, again, I consider them sort of the days of primary threat. This is both to the source, the individual doing the revealing, and to the journalists who have to bear the reputational risk that what if this is a hoax? Or what if these are real documents and they mishandle them and they get stolen, or they get, whatever, or their institution faces an injunction by the government? How do you make sure that this still makes its way to public hands? The model that I put forth was that I would curate these documents to my personal understandings of what's in the public interest, but of course it's not my specialty. I would then provide this archive to journalists who would then be charged with removing my personal bias from the equation. They would look at this and make their own independent press judgments of what the public needs to know, what the public doesn't need to know. And there are documents in that archive that are never intended to be published, right? These are things that are about legitimate programs that do have real value that should continue. But if journalists don't have that context of what is an effective program, a lawful program, and what is an ineffective, unlawful program, they can't make that proper public interest determination. Now, once they had written their stories, I required them personally, and a lot of people take issue with this, and that's proper, right? I'm an animal of government, right? I self-selected to join the CIA, the NSA, and so on and so forth. And I said to the journalists, I'd like you to take your stories once you've published them and share the themes of them, at least the names of the program, with the government. So the government could basically give you a sanity check and go, is this going to put a particular life at risk? Now, the government doesn't get a veto here. The government can't say you can't do this. But the government did have an opportunity to make their case that maybe the journalists overlooked something, some equity, some interest that should be taken into account. Now, from my perspective, this was probably the best that I could have done acting in a vacuum. But then Ron brought up this question of what should the next generation do? And I would argue actually that I'm not the best placed to make that argument. So actually, Ron and Amy, I'd like to turn it over to you. What do you think the next whistleblower should do when they're confronted with sort of evidence of unlawful or unconstitutional activity?